in early 2009 asked me to pitch a story to them about former Yugoslavia, because they knew I was going back there yearly to visit my grandmother who lives in Serbia. And I pitched a couple of things, you know, about food and Belgrade and whatnot, and then at the end I tacked on vampires. Why not? And that was the one they chose. They said, "All right, go write about vampires." So I went and we took this trundling trip in, you know, a rundown car to some pretty isolated places that didn't really appear on any maps, and asked people. The places were known throughout Serbia and sort of throughout the Balkan region for having these very vivid vampire legends that were still present, you know, the aftermath of which was still present today. And we went and visited Kisiljevo and Zarozje, and we got a lot of doors slammed in our faces because it's knock knock, can you tell us about the vampire? And, you know, it's either no and a very strong no, or it's yes, come in and we'll drink and we'll tell you about the vampire. So it was just an amazing experience, and it really reconnected me to the area, and I learned a lot about village life. So.
And how long ago was that?
This was 2009. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
I was reading an article in the New York Times right before I came here, actually, about your renowned success. It all came so suddenly. And I was reading that your agent was 30 and it was his first book that he sold, and your editor was 26 and it was his first book. Mm-hmm. And as someone who's written a book and is just starting the agent search, I'm really curious about your process. What did that look like for you? I mean, did you encounter a lot of rejection letters, or what was the process like?
I actually had the tremendous fortune of being referred to my agent by a colleague. And I didn't have very much of the book written. I only had 60 pages. But he read it and accepted me anyway, which was, you know, sort of... but the process was, I knew in searching for an agent that he very much fit the requirements for what I wanted in an agent, which was somebody young and somebody who, you know, who was as new at everything as I was, so that we could basically, like, it's a relationship that you build over time. And I felt very fortunate. It was pretty amazing that we matched up so well right away, because I know a lot of people for whom it's a trial and error process, and they'll go with one agent and it won't work out for a while, and then they'll go with another agent, and then, you know, something else goes wrong. But it was amazing. It was sort of like it was a perfect match. So yeah, that was I can't speak to it very well because it's such a weird experience to have that. It's so unusual, and I kept knocking on wood. How lucky for me that this podium is wood. Thank you. But yeah, thank you for that question.
More clients?
What? Always. What other question? Yes.
Yeah. Like you, I was 7 when I had to learn English. I came from a multilingual, also from Yugoslavia.
Oh, wow.
What language are you thinking in when you're writing regionally like this? Because when you said in the beginning about the sweeper, and he was full, in my mind, I hear Budala.
Budala, yeah.
And he's a Budala. And that explains a lot more than saying fool.
Mm-hmm.
So do you switch around languages in your mind?
I have, what I have read in Serbo-Croatian has astounded me. There's a whole different, it's an extremely, those languages from that area, like Russian, are extremely complex, and there's a lot implied. Like you said, like a single word carries a lot more connotation than a single word might in English or other languages, including Romance language. But I definitely think in English, but I think that some of the cadence of that, you know, the way people talk, and there's a little bit, the grammar's a little bit off, you know, it's not perfect English. I think that the cadence of Serbo-Croatian comes through. And I know that I speak with Serbo-Croatian rhythm when I talk in daily life. So I think that it's sort of a weird blend of both. But I definitely think and write in English. But I did think Budala, and then but in the rhythm tried to carry it across. So, you.
As a writer and of Serbian interest, how do you internalize the recent drastic political changes in Bosnia, and you must be affected by all of this?
Politics is really not my. I think that I mean, it's not my strong suit in the sense that it really affects, more affects family members that I have there. I'm very optimistic about the region in general, and hopefully the generation that I speak to and my friends and people that I know there, there's this great spirit of moving forward and past the stuff that happened in the 2000s and in the 90s as well, and I'm optimistic about that, and hopefully it'll come through. So I mean, optimism is my way to go always. So, yeah.
But story-wise, you don't see this as something that affects you maybe latently or subconsciously?
I really don't know. I mean, I tried to capture, the turmoil that I knew about and parts of the aftermath that I had experienced, but I didn't want to get caught in historical particulars and wanted really to capture more the essence of the conflict rather than the specifics and sort of the historical inventory of who did what to whom and where and why. Because I think that the essence of it is so much more universal, and I wanted to tell human stories and not dwell on the politics, which I think is actually, I think that allegory is perhaps a better way to address politics, at least for me, when dealing with art. I know other people, it is different, but yeah. Thank you. Yes.
I believe you mentioned that this kind of came about in workshop, right?
Yes.
You can talk a little bit about that, but did you have that story with you that you just needed to express, or was it something that was like just came about in workshop and got developed? And when did you know? And also, when did you know it was it?
The story was born in workshop, sort of out of weird circumstances. It wasn't. My grandfather had died in 2006, and the story did end up being about a young woman and her grandfather. So there were things that snuck in subliminally that I realized, several months in, and I was like, oh, and yes, I too. I'm going through this in my life. What a weird coincidence, But the story came about as a result of, I watched a National Geographic episode about Siberian tigers, and it just sort of, the title came out of the air. The title was the first thing that appeared, and it came out of the air, and then I sat down and wrote the story about an escaped circus tiger and like a young woman that he performs with. And it was just garbage. It was awful, and it took a real beating in workshop. And people were like, "I don't know what you're doing, but there's people with pitchforks in this story, and that's never a good thing." and I was, I was mortified that I had put pitchforks in. But I was attached, but the seed of it was there. And I was attached to this tiger, and I was attached to this girl, and then the little boy somehow became the narrator's grandfather, and all this stuff just developed by itself, kind of while I wasn't looking. Which is sort of, I mean, it is my first novel, and was my first novel, my first attempt at a novel, and I didn't even know I was attempting it. I just knew it was going to be a larger project. And then it turned into this, and so a lot of it, I think, your work runs away with you and with itself. So yeah, it's weird. Yes.
Excuse me. In reading it, I notice you don't formally introduce the characters. They're just there, and like I had a hard time figuring out who Zora was. And I was wondering, is that a deliberate literary device?
Yeah, it is. I kind of I have a tendency to lean towards fiction where the characters where the characters are thrown into the middle of a situation, and the situation is, I think that the world, let me try to explain this differently. I think that the world of the piece, whether it's a short story or a novel, is more believable if the reader lands in it while things are already going on. And it's like you've landed on the carousel, but it's already going, and the world that way exists outside, before you, and it will exist after your presence as a reader. And somehow I think it happened that way, and I think it's because of it's because of my own taste for fiction like that. So yeah, I do just throw the characters there, and I'm like, this person exists. Catch up. No, figure it out. Yeah, no, it's. I know that it's not necessarily. In some ways, it's not particularly generous, but it's what I like to read, and I think that we often end up writing what we like to read. So, yeah. David is pointing at somebody this way. Somebody had a hand up and then gave up.
I was just going to reinforce what you said about the story writing itself. Because I used to volunteer on a community radio station. I had a program called Mind Week where I did 3 hours in the evening. And I never knew what I was going to do.
Right.
I brought music, I brought readings, and then I just went where the program wanted to go, and I followed along.
It's surprising. I mean, I think that your work can surprise you in many ways. Like, I wrote with an outline that didn't end up being, you know, it was there, but what I wrote towards the outline, but in the end, what I wrote was not what was said on the outline, you know. And it was a very it was surprising. Like, you surprise yourself. Your work, the life that your work takes on, surprises even you. I think so.